Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to go back to the Champions League 2011 final and look how Lionel Messi played a key role in Barcelona destroying Manchester United. When we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Barcelona in a 4-3-3 as expected, and this time we had Manchester United making a big decision tactically. Would they go with Javier Hernandez up front ahead of Wayne Rooney, or would they throw in another midfielder to help United compete in that central zone? Logically, it would make sense to have another midfielder in that zone, but the problem that Sir Alex Ferguson did encounter was that Darren Fletcher and Anderson were dealing with fitness issues, and it didn't make sense to throw Paul Scholes into the mix, given the fact that he would be going up against the best midfield we've arguably ever seen. So what Ferguson ended up doing was that he opted for that 4-4-1-1 with Rooney just in behind Hernandez, but it left that midfield zone vacant. When we look how Barcelona looked to approach the game, what we ended up seeing here tactically was that they swapped Villa and Pedro. The reasoning behind that was that when you put Pedro to the left-hand side, you have him going up against Fabio da Silva rather than Patrice Evra, who's a significantly better 1v1 defender. So you have Pedro holding the touchline down that left-hand side, you have Messi playing central, and on the right-hand side, you have Villa against Evra, and yes, that does take away from Villa cutting on to his right foot to curl efforts on goal, but what it ends up doing here is that it drags Evra out of position, and it forces the United left-sided player here, being Park Ji-sung, to track the runs of Dani Alves as he looks to push forward. So that was an intentional ploy from Guardiola, and if you have Villa central, what ends up happening there is that with Messi dropping off deeper into that midfield zone, it occupies the center of the pitch, and it ensures that Barcelona has a goal-scoring threat in that center area. So that's how Barcelona looked to approach the game, and when you look at Manchester United, you expected them to drop off into two banks of four. So you have Javier Hernandez stepping into the path of Piqué, and that left Javier Mascherano free. Normally you would want Wayne Rooney to possibly apply pressure there, but what ends up happening there is that the midfield battle was set. You had Carrick and Giggs swapping sides in that midfield to deal with Xavi and Iniesta, and then Rooney was tasked to sticking towards Busquets. The problem that United didn't want was Rooney looking to press high, because then that leaves Busquets free, and if you have Carrick or Giggs step out to him, that leaves Iniesta, Messi, or Xavi free as they all look to drop off deeper. The one key thing that we should note here is that with United dropping off into those two banks of four, what also can be said is that Antonio Valencia kept a narrow position to ensure that Iniesta didn't get space in that left channel. So you have Valencia tucking in narrow into Iniesta, you have Carrick and Giggs opting to step out into the path of Xavi, and with one being free in case Messi drops off a bit deeper, and then you want Rooney sticking towards Busquets. Now the obvious ploy for Barcelona here is to push the fullbacks forward, and they did do that. You have Alves pushing back Park because there is space created for Alves due to Villa's movement, but if you get the ball out to Abidal, you want Valencia to be pulled out of position, because if you pull Valencia out of position there, what it now leaves is that open gap in that left channel, because now you need Giggs or Carrick to step out into the path of Iniesta, you need the other midfielder to deal with Xavi, and that leaves space for Messi to drop off deeper, which was often happening. You can have Nemanja Vidic step out into that zone, but he couldn't do it every single time, and that's where you have Messi dropping off deeper to receive the ball freely, and that's where the Barcelona midfield overload does commence. However, when Barcelona looked to get the ball out to Abidal, the only time that Valencia did look to step into his path was when Abidal started to move into United's third. So Valencia kept his narrow positioning down in that right channel, and that ensured that that space that Iniesta likes to tuck into to thread through balls in beyond the United defense was occupied. United kept their defensive line very deep, but the problem here is that the midfield was being pulled out of position to close down Barcelona midfielders, and that created the space between the lines for Messi to dart into. When you look at United, the only real attacking threat that we saw from them was the fact that they did look to pump balls into Javier Hernandez, but that necessarily didn't make sense given the fact that although he does have a lot of pace, most of his goals are generated in around the 6-yard box where he's able to poach them into the net rather than him beating an aggressive high line, which is what Barcelona did implement. And frankly, the only time that he did break free stemmed from a long ball from Van der Sar that Mascherano did miss time, but Valdez came off his line quickly to ensure that Hernandez didn't offer a goal-scoring threat. The other factor that should be mentioned here is that if you have Messi dropping off ahead of the midfield or ahead of that gap between Giggs and Park, if Messi is able to win his 1v1 battles, which he often did, that creates an avenue for the midfielders to receive the ball given the fact that cover has to shift over to Messi. When we look to Barcelona's first goal, it stems through Piqué winning an aerial duel over Rooney. He nods the ball into the path of Xavi ahead of Carrick. Xavi ends up dropping the ball off to Iniesta, who combines with Busquets, and when Iniesta gets the ball back, he locates Xavi running off of Carrick. Iniesta plays that ball across Carrick into the path of Xavi between the lines, and that's how you see how United's lines are broken initially. When Xavi runs at that back four, you have Villa running offside in between Fabio and Ferdinand, but what also happens here is that Messi drops off a bit deeper to pull out Evra, and that's where you see Pedro adopting that central role as he squeezes into a gap across Vidic and Evra, and that's where Xavi's able to slide the ball into him and he's able to beat Van der Sar at the near post. But in that build-up, you have Iniesta breaking the United gap to find Xavi between the lines, and then Messi's movement pulls Evra out of position, and that's where you see two Barcelona runners breaking and beyond, and Xavi's able to find that pass in between Evra and Vidic. When we look to one final Barcelona opportunity, we witness how United's pressing could go wrong if Rooney does step away from Busquets. We have Valdez splitting Mascherano and Piqué with Rooney and Hernandez stepping to the Barcelona center backs to find Busquets, and when Busquets receives the ball, he ends up splitting Giggs and Carrick to find Messi drifting off Giggs between the lines. Now what ends up happening there is that with Abidal and Alves pegging back the wide United players, Messi is able to run at the United backline. Messi runs at the back four and he ends up sliding the ball between Vidic and Evra for David Villa, but with Carrick carrying him, Messi does dart towards the 6-yard box, but Villa's ball in towards the 6-yard box bypasses Messi, who is pressured by Carrick and Van der Sar. But in that build-up, you see United's front line being split, you see the midfield being bypassed with Messi receiving the ball between the lines, and then you see Villa being played in through Messi's creativity, and that was the issue that Barcelona posed towards Manchester United. And heading towards that second half, you had to question how Ferguson would be looking to change it. So heading into the second half, we did see Ferguson make a tactical shift. He ended up swapping Giggs and Park permanently, and the reasoning behind that was the fact that he wanted more energy in the center of the pitch to step towards Carrick and Iniesta, but there were problems that United encountered with that. One being the fact that United's midfield bank dropped deeper with the defensive bank, and now what Iniesta and Xavi simply did was they dropped off a bit deeper to control the tempo of the game from those zones, and they forced Park and Carrick to step out of position. The other issue that they had was that out in the wider areas, Alves and Abidal pushed into more advanced positions, and that ended up pegging back Giggs and Valencia. So you have Giggs and Valencia pegged back into deeper positions so they can't help out Park and Carrick. And the other factor here was the fact that now you have Messi dropping off a bit deeper. He makes it a 3v2 battle in that center of the pitch. So that means that you would have to pull Vidic out constantly to help out in that zone. That was an unrealistic expectation from Ferguson. And down that left-hand side, rather than having Park's energy deal with Dani Alves, now you had an older Ryan Giggs having to track arguably the best right back in the world at that time. So those are the issues that Manchester United did encounter, and Barcelona constantly exploited them. So when we look to one example, we witness how Barcelona's shape was able to exploit Ferguson's tactical shift. We have Xavi ahead of Park and he squares the ball into Iniesta ahead of Carrick, and Iniesta plays the ball across Carrick into Messi, pulling out Vidic, who did stick tight to Messi. The issue here was that Messi was able to play the ball back to Iniesta, and then you see Villa drift laterally to pull Evra out of position. So you have Vidic pulled out of position due to Messi's movement, you have Evra pulled out of his position due to Villa's shifting laterally, and then you have Alves running off Giggs, and you see that big gap in that right channel. So Iniesta plays the ball across Carrick once again to find Dani Alves, and he breaks free into right half space, but he's denied by Van der Sar. That wasn't the first time that Alves broke in beyond Giggs to get into a good goal scoring position. The second time saw him square the ball across goal towards Messi, but he was unable to guide his effort past Van der Sar. And shortly after that, we see Messi put Barcelona ahead, and this time we witness how United's deeper shape allowed Iniesta and Xavi to dictate the game. You have Xavi sliding the ball out to Pedro ahead of Fabio, and Pedro drops it off to Iniesta ahead of Carrick and Park. Neither of those two players step towards Iniesta, and you have Messi to the right of Park as he drops off a bit deeper. Iniesta plays that ball square to Messi, and with Villa shifting towards Vidic, what we end up seeing now is that Messi has a gap to dart towards goal. Park doesn't get across to close him down, and Evra and Vidic don't step ahead in time, and you have Messi curling that ball around Vidic past Van der Sar. But once again, you have Iniesta against two United midfielders, Messi dropping off to make it 3v2, Villa manipulating Evra's positioning, and that allows Messi to get that ball between the lines and present a goal threat that eventually puts Barcelona ahead. We saw different variations of this following that goal, and it just goes to show that Barcelona were getting their tactics right, and Ferguson needed to make another shift. The only change that Ferguson did make was that he did replace Fabio for Dani, and that saw Valencia move to right back, but we didn't see whether that tactical shift would have helped Barcelona, as minutes later Messi went on an individual run down that right channel beyond Dani, Evra and Ferdinand, and the ball ended up falling to Villa, who curled his effort into the top corner and ultimately killed off the game as Barcelona looked to play keep ball rather than increasing their lead. But when you break down that game as a whole, Barcelona were the better side and undoubtedly the best side in Europe. But when you assess it, Ferguson could have made a few tactical shifts there. One, he did get his system wrong, and going with Rooney and Hernandez was a bit too adventurous, and it allowed Barcelona to dominate the center of the pitch. And the other factor here was that Lionel Messi was unstoppable on the day, and because they had that 4v3 and 4v2 battle, Ferguson didn't have any alternative to shutting him down, and as that game continued, Xavi and Iniesta and eventually Busquets gained control of it, and Messi was able to get the ball in key areas to impact the game and ultimately ensure that Barcelona won the Champions League. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.